Welcome to EHO Knows. In today's episode, we're going to be talking to Sarah Ainsworth, who is El Presidente of EHA New South Wales. So we're in for the good stuff. And what we're looking at today is, basically, what is the future of environmental health in Australia? What are the challenges that are coming up? And in a large part, it's what are the challenges that you're experiencing day to day? I'm going to play hardball. I'm going to be going, yes, but what's EHA doing about this? What's the difference they make? But it's really just what are your day-to-day challenges and what's the future looking like and how can we try and improve it, head off disaster? So welcome, Sarah.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
First of all, who are you? Where are you? What do you do?
Yes, my name is Sarah Ainsworth. I am New South Wales President of Environmental Health Australia, and I am supported by some wonderful, passionate environmental health practitioners on the New South Wales board and also some observers. So we have a great range and depth of coverage across the profession on our board. I also sit on the Environmental Health Australia National Board as a New South Wales representative. So I get to advocate for New South Wales and raise EHA issues on a national scale as well. So that's very rewarding. When I am not doing Environmental Health Australia work, I am in my day job, which is Business Manager of Environmental Health and Regulation at Goulburn Council, which is situated between Sydney and Canberra. We are a regional city surrounded by some small villages. So we have a real range of land uses, different constraints, challenges and opportunities. We cover all functions of environmental health work, but as part of our regulatory arm, we also do our development compliance, pollution incidents. If a truck rolls over on the Hume Highway, we have to attend to provide advice and also assist in the cleanup of that sort of thing. So we have a really exciting and diverse function of environmental health and regulation in our particular area. Yeah, no 2 days are the same in Goulburn.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at 7 hot topics that are facing environmental health officers right now and into the future. Let's start with what I think is the most boring one, legislation. What are the big changes that are happening in legislation at the moment that are going to be impacting environmental health in the next couple of years?
With legislative reform, in that there has been, over recent years, a bit of a shift in the way that the state government, when they're redoing their legislation, more often than not, those legislative changes relate to the delegation of state government functions to local government entities. So the problem with that is that councils, local government organisations, are being burdened with additional functions, but with no additional ability to generate revenue from those functions and also no additional resourcing. And that's one of the real issues, is that councils are having to absorb a certain amount of risk in that there may be functions that are handed over to us in certain pieces of legislation, like underground petroleum storage systems, which were delegated from the EPA to New South Wales councils. Some New South Wales councils have picked that up and have had the capacity to implement inspection programs, but the majority of New South Wales councils have not. So there is an element of risk that's associated with that, in that it is a function that sits with local government, but local governments don't have the capacity to undertake that function. So it means that there's no improvement in the standards of those underground petroleum storage systems because we're not actually inspecting them. We're not making sure that they're compliant with the new legislation that came in because we don't have the capacity to do so. So that's a real challenge in the environmental health space, and I find it a real challenge when I am fighting for my slice of the pie at budget time, because a lot of the functions that we have been delegated do not have a revenue generation capacity. So you've got to offset them somehow. So it's very hard for me to advocate for additional resources for my team to be able to do these functions if there isn't a way for council to then recoup the costs associated for it. So it becomes a bit of a buffet in that you say, well, for this package, we're going to be able to deliver these services. If you want the gold class buffet at the restaurant where you get your entrees, your mains, and your dessert, we need additional bums on seats. And unfortunately, due to budgetary constraints at the local government level, most of the time, your directors and your executive team, they will go for the standard menu items. So that's a real issue with legislative changes and the delegation of functions, and that's what EHA has been advocating for our members and making submissions, particularly where pieces of legislation come up for review. So we've just done a submission on the food regulation, which is open for review. There's the nighttime economy reforms, which we've made a submission on, and we also made a submission on the proposed changes to the UPSS regulation, because of the fact that that's what we're hearing from our members, that these things have a real impact on the way that they do their job and they undertake their roles, and demonstrate to councils and management and executive teams the importance of environmental health work and the outcomes for the community and the environment. So we've been really focused on making sure that where these pieces of legislation come up for review, that we're making strong submissions for the reforms and also highlighting the inadequacies in the current models and legislative. Also making sure that there's appropriate administrative fees provided for in the regulations for if you need to go down the orders or notices route. Like, these all make a difference to everyday on the ground EHOs being able to justify to their management and to their executive teams that these are essential functions. They might not be mandated for us to do, but hey, we can generate revenue from them. We can put on additional staff and we can fund these programs moving forward, and it's for the betterment of both the environment and the communities that we're here to serve.
So as El Presidente, what's the official line in terms of you're an environmental health officer in a council that is under-resourced in the first place, and you've suddenly got more put on your plate? What's your advice to an environmental health officer who just feels totally overwhelmed by these changes?
What we've been able to do is we have a really cohesive membership group. And because of the fact that Environmental Health Australia is a national body as well as has its own state-based boards, we can escalate those issues that we're seeing across the board through our New South Wales government channels and also through those broader, national government channels. So our advice has long been lean into the community that you have, because individually we can't make as much fuss or be as big a voice as we can as a group. And what we've found is when we bring people together throughout the year, people who lean into that community and come along and who are part of our membership base, they go, wow, I'm not alone. I've got budget constraints. I'm beating my head against a wall with my management who may not understand the diversity of the role that we're currently doing. We do have areas where environmental health is, tucked in underneath planning or building, and planning and building obviously draw a lot of revenue, have mandatory qualification and accreditation requirements. So sometimes environmental health can be seen as the poor cousin, in that when we're fighting for our slice of the pie for both functional improvements and also training, it can be really difficult. And that's been one of the really consistent messages that have come back from our membership is, I just don't seem to be getting anywhere with advocating for more resources. So one of the lines that we have really been hammering home is that you need to be framing these messages with a risk-based approach. So councils, and I would assume state government agencies are the same, is that they all have a level of risk that they're willing to accept. So unfortunately, it's about framing the functions that we're not doing or are incapable of doing with our current resourcing, framing those and saying, well, that's fine. You tell me what you want me to do. I will do that. But also you need to specify the functions that we're not going to do and acknowledge the fact that there is a risk associated with us not carrying out that function. So I think it's really important to highlight that risk. And EHA have got quite a number of resources, that can sort of embed that message and assist our members in, highlighting those issues with management, with other organisations. Particularly last year, Environmental Health Australia had a stall at the National Convention for Local Government, and it was eye-opening. We had general managers, CEOs, and counsellors all there coming to our stall saying, what do you do? What are you here selling? And it was, we're not here selling anything. We're here to raise awareness of a profession that exists in absolutely every one of your local government areas that you perhaps don't understand or fully appreciate the role that's being done, and also the seriousness if that role is not being done adequately. I think, as I said to you earlier, I had a previous manager who used to always say to me, silence is a standing ovation. And unfortunately, the times when environmental health has really come to the forefront has been when something's gone terribly wrong. It seems to be this pattern. It is that silence where we're all working away in the background to prevent things from going wrong. And it's not until something catastrophic happens that they go, those EHOs, what have they been doing? Why haven't they been looking at that? Because you didn't give us the resources to look at that. So you're going to need to give us some appropriate resourcing to carry that forward. It is an issue all across Australia, and that was one of the things that was that's really highlighted at our national board meetings, and also through attending the local government General Assembly. There was representatives from 1,300 local government organisations across Australia, and the conversations that we were having with these representatives were all the same. Oh, yeah, I think we've got someone at our council that does that. You should definitely know them, and you should know what they do and the functions that your council performs, because you should be highlighting that to the community.
Yeah, which is a great segue straight through one of the big points that we're talking about. The future problems is it's a professional body, but isn't perceived as a professional body, and so how it's perceived by the council, how it's perceived by the general public, and you run the risk that it's going to be deprecated. And do we really need someone with that level of qualification? Surely we can just get someone who has got a first aid certificate, and then they can go out and do everything. Sorry to all first aiders out there. It's not a derogatory comment about first aiders, but yeah, we do have that risk of, it's not perceived as a profession. Anyone can do it. And on top of that, it's actually getting worse in terms of you needing more and more qualifications, and the push is to have less and less qualifications. What can individuals do about it?
So I suppose the big overarching issue in regards to this is the fact that in New South Wales, the legislation does not stipulate what qualifications or any requirements for continuing professional development for someone to undertake environmental health work under prescribed acts. So your Public Health Act and your Food Act do not say an environmental health officer is defined as this, and you need these minimum qualifications, or you need to be accredited and undertake continuing professional development in order to be able to undertake these functions.
Big controversial question. Who's got their act together the most?
So Western Australia has an incredible accreditation program. It is mandated in their legislation that in order to undertake environmental health work, you must be accredited. To be accredited, you have to have done an Environmental Health Australia accredited course and have professional experience. They actually assess every applicant so that you can be endorsed under the legislation. The reality is Victoria has similar. It's not as robust as Western Australia, but those are two states that have legislative requirements that in order to do environmental health work, you must be accredited in some capacity. Until New South Wales has in the legislation a requirement for accreditation and continuing professional development. That's a big one because we have such an evolving profession. We will continue to see our profession white-anted by the fact that anyone can be appointed under these pieces of legislation as authorised officers. The reality is that it sits with us, and I mean us as hiring managers, to hold our ground with that. So there is nothing wrong with putting on someone as an environmental health officer who may have a science-based degree in another stream. What we have done here at Goulburn is 2 of our EHOs had a science-based degree, applied for our environmental health officer position, had appropriate skills, but not the appropriate qualification. So the requirement from my side was that as part of your employment, put you on an EHO position, but within the first 6 months, you need to sign up to do an appropriate postgraduate qualification to make sure that you have the appropriate skills and qualifications, and both of those have absolutely flourished in their roles. It is something that councils can utilise to upskill people who may not have the appropriate qualification, but the real problem that we have is that councils aren't taking that next step. They're putting on people who don't have the appropriate skills and qualifications. One of the things is, as I said, without accreditation, we've got building surveyors, we've got planners who have minimum qualification requirements and also continuing professional development requirements. One of the things that we've found, particularly since the building surveyors became an accredited profession, is that if I'm going to my director advocating for the training courses for my staff, it's much more difficult for me to secure funding, because the line that we get back is, we have to send the building surveyors for their continuing professional development. It's mandatory under the legislation. We have to send them. We're not going to be able to send your guys this time because they don't have a requirement for their CPD, which is incredibly frustrating because our profession is so evolving. There's new skin penetration practices all the time. There's new regulations all the time. We need to be undertaking that continuing professional development to stay across these new and emerging trends, particularly in regional locations where that technology comes at a much slower pace. Another thing that we've found is, particularly with food, people being empowered under the Food Act or appointed as authorised officers under the Act who don't have the necessary qualifications is a real contention for us. Again, if councils are looking at an overall budget and they come to you as a hiring manager and they say, are we demanding that these people have degree level qualifications or the equivalent, when essentially I can appoint a support officer and empower them under the Food Act and pay them half what I'm paying an environmental health officer. So it's about making sure that you're putting that messaging in that says, well, no, you can't appoint an environmental health support officer to one of these positions for the following reasons. And that's why we wrote to the Minister for Local Government and the New South Wales Health Minister in late 2023, a very large piece of advocacy work campaigning for accreditation, that these are the minimum qualifications that an environmental health officer has to be able to do this work, and the reason why that's so critical. We did receive a response, and it sort of directed us back to the environmental health branch of New South Wales Health, and sort of, I won't say that we were fobbed off, but we were fobbed off to a certain extent, which was incredibly frustrating. But that's not where it ends. We're continuing our advocacy work. We're attending these local government events. We write to ministers at both a state and a federal level, trying to advocate for this national accreditation. Yes, we understand that the legislation is different in each state and would need to be implemented at each state's levels, but it's certainly an advocacy piece that is ongoing, and one that, you know, our membership really championed and got behind. And we shared the letter that we sent to the minister with all of our membership, and the support that we got back from that was just phenomenal. I think that a lot of the New South Wales membership didn't realise that accreditation was mandatory in places like Western Australia and Victoria, and I think that really highlighted the issues that we've got in New South Wales, and, you know, the difficulties that we've got in, you know, maintaining and also attracting new people to environmental health, you know, really trying to get us up in lights as a profession.
Okay, shameless plug for EHO Knows, but part of the reason for the podcast is it's absolutely amazing the scope of work that environmental health officers do. Can you actually verbalise it? How do you sell it to your superiors? How do you sell it to the public? Because at the end of the day, your funding relies upon it, but the support from government, the support from the local community, all relies on them understanding the value that you offer. But the other thing is, you know, day in, day out, who cares who goes in and inspects the restaurant? That's fine. But what do you do the day that 100 people get food poisoning from a restaurant? You go, no, yeah, day in, day out, anyone can do that job, but the professionals are the ones who handle the disasters. And you never know which day is going to be the disaster. And so you're battling the 99.9% of the time, everything's fine. You go, Yeah, but it's the 0.1% that will kill people.
That's exactly right. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, that's when the councillors and the CEO and the general manager and the directors come looking for the environmental health team, is when something's gone terribly wrong. One of the funny things that I was pondering when you were talking to me about this podcast is you named it EHO knows, but a lot of people don't know what an EHO does. I think that's the really funny part is, yeah, EHO knows all these things. The general public are blissfully unaware for the majority of the time on the essential functions that we're doing. And it seems to be this key theme that keeps coming out every time. What's our one-liner that you can say to someone, as you say, down in the pub? Because if you say to someone, I'm an environmental health officer, they go, what's that? Oh, I'm a health inspector? You dumb it down because they don't often think of the other functions that we carry out. And so we've been playing around with, environmental health, protecting people from hazards in their environment. And again, people still think hazards, nuclear, like that there isn't that automatic, oh yeah, thought bubble, environmental health, this is what it is. The reality is that not many people know what an EHO knows. So
Yes.
yeah, it's a piece of work, and one of the big challenges, making sure that people know, appreciate and understand the critical role that we play across, there's environmental health practitioners.
So that's the end of part one. And I think the take-home message for part one is, how are you selling environmental health? Because how you perceive yourself and how you're passing that message on to management and the public will dictate the future of the entire industry. And so in the comments, share, how do you sell what you do? How do you promote what you do to your friends, to bosses or whatever? Drop them in the comments. And then in the next episode, part two, we're going to be continuing the list of the challenges facing the future. So thank you, Sarah. So I'll catch you for part two soon.